The sun had just begun to rise over the jagged peaks of Olympic National Park when a thick mist rolled across the Soul River Valley, curling like smoke between the towering firs. It was the kind of morning that felt ancient, quiet, reverent, and filled with the kind of silence that presses against your skin. The forest breathed in rhythm, the trees holding secrets no one had ever asked them to reveal. And then it appeared. Just off the edge of the gravel road that wound through the valley like a serpent, a red bicycle, standing upright as if someone had carefully placed it there. Next to it, a small trailer, unhitched and resting awkwardly in the dirt. A tarp had been laid out nearby, weighed down by stones. Cooking gear, a sleeping bag, a folded flannel shirt. All of it arranged like someone had paused to take a breath and never came back. At first, no one thought much of it. Rangers assumed the cyclist had gone hiking and would be back by nightfall. The spot wasn't ideal for camping, too close to the road, too exposed, but nothing about it screamed danger. Not yet. So the bike sat there, untouched. One day, then two, then three. It wasn't until a woman driving down the Soul River Hot Springs Road noticed something that chilled her, that the silence broke. It wasn't the gear itself. It was what lay beside it. 4 arrows, simple wooden shafts, each one carefully planted in the earth in a straight east-west line, as if marking a boundary or pointing toward something only one person understood. She took a photo and drove on. But the image stayed with her. Later that night, unable to sleep, she called the park station and reported it. That was April 6th. By the next morning, park rangers arrived. The bike was still there, the gear untouched. No blood, no signs of a struggle, no footprints leading away from the scene. It was as if the owner had simply vanished into the mist. The man's name was Ethan Cole, 22 years old, originally from Santa Cruz, California. He had told his sister he was planning a cross-country bike tour, first east, then north, before eventually looping back home. But instead of going east, he'd gone northwest, straight into one of the most isolated regions in the Pacific, and now only his belongings remained. 3 days passed before anyone even realized Ethan was missing. That delay would prove to be everything. April 7th. Ranger Paul Keller was the one who found a crumpled slip of paper tucked inside a side pouch on the trailer. It was a list of emergency contacts, written in Ethan's messy, block handwriting. At the top was a name, Leah Cole, labeled SIS. When she answered the phone, her voice cracked before the ranger had even said anything. "Is he okay?" she asked. Keller paused. "We don't know yet," he said. "We found his gear, but not Ethan." Within hours, Leah was on the phone with her father, David Cole, a general contractor with a weather-beaten truck and a stubborn streak that had once earned him the nickname the bulldozer on job sites. He didn't wait for permission or guidance. He didn't ask what to bring. He threw a wetsuit into the back of his truck, kissed his dog goodbye, and started the 16-hour drive north. He got pulled over in Oregon, doing 102 miles per hour. When the officer heard what was happening, he let David go with a warning. "Just be careful," the officer said. David didn't respond. He was already pulling back onto the highway. Eyes bloodshot, knuckles white. Olympic National Park is often called one of the most unforgiving landscapes in North America, not because of its beauty, but because of its indifference. It does not care if you're tired or lost or scared. Its rivers are fed by snowmelt, its cliffs crumble without warning, and its weather can shift from sunshine to hail in a matter of minutes. It is not a place for the unprepared, and yet Ethan had come here alone. By the time David and Leah arrived at the ranger station, the disbelief in their eyes quickly turned to rage. "No official search has been launched," the ranger said. "We're understaffed. We have another missing person case and a downed aircraft in the west quadrant. His bike was found near a public road. For now, it's classified as a passive case." Leah's lips trembled. "Passive?" she repeated. "You think he just walked away from everything he owns and forgot to come back?" Ranger Keller didn't have an answer, just a tired expression and a clipboard. David wasn't having it. He put on the wetsuit, zipped it halfway up, and walked. Straight into the Soul River. The water was just above freezing. It hit like a punch to the ribs, stealing his breath and numbing his limbs within seconds. But David didn't care. He dunked himself under waterfalls, pushed his face into currents so fast they could tear logs in half, scanned the undersides. Of bridges, log jams, boulders, he found nothing. But every day he didn't find Ethan's body was another day. He could still believe his son was alive. The story began to spread. A few hikers recalled seeing someone matching Ethan's description, hauling a red trailer up a steep slope near Indian Valley on April 5th. A woman swore she saw a young man with shoulder-length dark hair pedaling slowly past Fairome Hill at 1:00 a.m. The last confirmed sighting came from a woman near Soul River Hot Springs Road. She remembered the boy struggling uphill against the weight of his gear, and then, hours later, noticed the bike. Abandoned. Why would he leave it all behind? Why the arrows? Why no footprints? The questions multiplied, and the silence of the forest began to feel less peaceful and more haunted. That same night, as David sat beside the river in the dark, soaked to the bone, he remembered something Ethan had once told him after a heated argument during the divorce. "I just want to go somewhere no one can find me." David hadn't thought much of it at the time. Teenager stuff? He had heard worse. But now, with the gear sitting untouched beside him, 4 arrows pointed like a compass into the unknown, David realized something. Maybe Ethan hadn't been lost at all. Maybe he had gone exactly where he meant to go. If you asked Ethan Cole's friends who he really was, they'd pause, then answer something vague, like a deep thinker or kind of intense but cool. Nobody ever said he was the life of the party or the first one to crack a joke. But he was the kind of person who'd listen when no one else would. The kind who'd notice the bird outside the window when everyone else was staring at their phones. There was always something a little removed about him, like he was watching life instead of living it. He'd just turned 22 a few months before he disappeared. Tall, lean, with quiet green eyes and a mop of dark brown hair that fell over his forehead no matter how many times he pushed it back. He had a small crescent-shaped scar on his temple from a skateboarding accident in middle school, and a laugh that came out more like a sudden breath. Ethan wasn't shy exactly, just selective with his words. He didn't waste them. He'd dropped out of college halfway through his second year. Philosophy major. Too many questions, not enough answers, he'd told his mom Susan when she asked why. The truth was more complicated. He hated the noise, the crowds, the pressure to define his life in 5-year increments. Everyone around him seemed so certain about everything. Ethan wasn't certain about anything. His parents' divorce had knocked the breath out of him. They split just after he turned 20. The house he grew up in, the one with the plum tree in. The backyard and the surfboard rack in the garage was sold 6 months later. His dad moved into a small rental, his mom into a 1-bedroom near the boardwalk. It wasn't the split that hit hardest. It was the way everything familiar just disappeared overnight. He called it the quiet collapse. Like the world hadn't ended, but it had caved in silently when no one was paying attention. Ethan began spending more and more time alone after that. He'd wake up early and ride his bike into the redwoods just to watch the morning light break through the trees. He filled notebooks with thoughts that read like questions with no punctuation. He read the Bible and Nietzsche in the same afternoon, not for answers, but to see if either one could make him feel something solid. Sometimes he walked the beach, for hours without music, without shoes, just the crashing of waves and his own breath. His sister, Leah, worried about him. She was 2 years younger, full of life and color, the kind of girl who left Post-it notes on mirrors and sent sunrise pictures to her contacts every morning. She'd always been the connector in the family, the glue between Ethan and their mom, between Ethan and their father. But lately, even she couldn't reach him. "Are you okay?" she'd asked one night, sitting across from him at the cafe they used to go to as kids. He shrugged. I'm not broken. That's not what I asked. I know, he said, and smiled that quiet, distant smile. When Christmas came, Leah gave him a set of 3 hand-forged throwing knives. He'd mentioned wanting to learn how to throw them once. Said it seemed meditative. She thought he was joking at the time, but his face had been serious. He never took them out of the box that day, just turned them over in his hands like something sacred. I might take a trip, he said that night while washing dishes. Something long, maybe east. His father David overheard. Where to? Ethan shrugged again. Anywhere that's not here. David had nodded slowly. You should tell someone when you go. I will. But he didn't. In the weeks before he left, Ethan grew even quieter. He started selling things, his PlayStation, some old books, even the guitar he rarely played. He upgraded the tires on his bike and bought a used red trailer off Craigslist. He ordered a new sleeping bag, a water purifier, freeze-dried food. It looked like an adventure. But Leah felt something else, something darker. Promise me you'll check in when you stop, she'd said the night before he left. I will. He hugged her at the door. Longer than usual. I'm proud of you, she whispered. Ethan didn't reply, just nodded, kissed her forehead, and walked into the night. That was March 28th. 1 week later, he was seen pushing his bike uphill under a full moon. 2 days after that, his gear was found by the river. And Ethan Cole was gone. What people didn't know, what no one could have known, was how much Ethan had been carrying before he ever stepped into the woods. He had written something in his last journal found among his things near the Soul River. There's something holy about getting lost, to be unseen, to hear only your breath. Maybe when I vanish, I'll finally be real. David read those words for the first time while sitting in the front seat of his truck, parked just off the Ford road where Ethan's bike had been discovered. He held the page for a long time, fingers trembling, heart caught between grief and fury. How the hell was I supposed to know, he whispered. But part of him did know, every silence, every shrug, every unanswered text. It was all there. He just didn't want to see it. Now he couldn't look away. The official search began 6 days too late. By then, the mist had already swallowed the footprints, the wind had scattered the leaves, the water had carried away whatever evidence it all might once have held. And the 4 arrows Ethan left behind? No one could explain them. Not the search teams, not the trackers, not even his family. Each arrow was simple, handcrafted, wooden, fletched with red and white feathers. They weren't hunting arrows, no broadheads, just sharpened tips and smooth shafts, planted in a perfectly straight line, east to west. 10 inches apart, each one angled slightly toward the river. Leah stared at them for a long time. Is it a signal? She asked. Like, for someone? David shook his head. No one camps this close to the road. He knew that. It's not like him. And why would he leave the gear out in the open? There were no answers, only theories. Ranger Keller labeled the site as organized abandon. That meant it didn't look like someone left in a panic. There was no torn fabric, no signs of struggle, no disturbed brush or prints of heavy movement. It looked like someone had unpacked their gear, then simply walked away. The only thing missing from the pile? Ethan's backpack and his throwing knives. Word spread quickly through the Olympic Peninsula. Locals began sharing stories, vague sightings, blurry photos, whispers. A man matching Ethan's description had been spotted 2 miles north, walking barefoot along the roadside, muttering to himself. Another claimed to have seen someone resembling him near a gas station in Forks, sitting at a picnic table with a woman in a gray hoodie. Each report ended the same way. By the time anyone followed up, the man was gone. What disturbed David the most wasn't the sightings. It was what wasn't found. Ethan's insulated jacket, gone. His crampons for hiking on ice, gone. His weatherproof pack, gone. None of them were in the pile by the river, which meant only one thing. Ethan had taken them with him. He had left intentionally. A week later, something else surfaced. A local fisherman named Harvey Durand was hiking upstream when he noticed a deep scrape on a moss-covered boulder near the river's edge, about 30 yards from where the bike had been found. He wasn't a tracker, but something about it felt off. As he looked closer, he saw a single footprint sunken into a patch of riverbank mud. It was narrow, light, as if the person had jumped down and landed hard. But there were no other prints nearby. Just that one. Park officials photographed the mark, but without a matching pair or a stride, it meant little. Still, it added weight to a growing suspicion. Ethan hadn't fallen into the river. He had crossed it. On April 12th, 2 cadaver dogs from the state's certified K9 search unit were brought in. They were led down the banks by a handler named Janice, a 30-year SR veteran with cold eyes and a voice like sandpaper. Both dogs hit on the same spot, a jammed cluster of driftwood just beyond a bend in the river. Their ears pricked up. They barked, then whined, then froze. "I don't like it," Janice muttered. "They don't false hit this deep." Divers were called in the next morning. They searched the jam 3 times. Nothing. No clothes, no gear, no remains. The dogs had reacted to something, but it wasn't there anymore. David started losing sleep. He'd set alarms for 3 a.m. Drive out to random logging roads and search under the headlights of his truck. He slept in the front seat, engine off, wrapped in Ethan's old sleeping bag. During the day, he retraced the same trails again and again, talking to hunters, hikers, homeless encampments. He followed every whisper, every long shot. He started keeping a notebook of oddities. April 14th. A young man spotted walking, alone toward Mount Appleton trailhead with no shoes and no gear. April 16th. An anonymous tip claiming a quiet guy with green eyes was staying at a commune near La Push. April 20. A set of Burnside brand shorts found snagged on a log 2 miles downstream. They were Ethan's size. David sent them to the crime lab in Seattle. The DNA came back negative, but there was one tip David couldn't shake. A woman named Kelsey Eberlin, a botanist working in the park, told him she'd seen something strange on April 10th, a man standing alone on a ridge just above Hall Lake. She'd been cataloging marmots from a distance with binoculars. The man wasn't moving, just standing, looking out over the valley. No tent, no gear, just stillness. She thought it was a ranger at first, but when she checked later, no rangers had been in the area that day. The location was 15 miles from where Ethan's gear had been found. It didn't make sense. Snow still covered parts of the trail. The ascent was brutal. There were no direct routes between the river and that ridge without serious climbing gear. But what if Ethan did make it up there? Why? Ranger Keller was skeptical. "The sighting's a stretch," he told David. "You'd have to believe he hiked barefoot through snow and avalanche zones with no rope, no map, no food." David didn't answer, because that's exactly what he was starting to believe. Inside one of Ethan's notebooks, Leah found something she hadn't seen before, a small hand-drawn compass. No numbers, no coordinates, just a jagged arrow drawn in. Red ink pointing up, away from the river. She brought it to David. "Look familiar?" He stared at it and thought of the arrows in the dirt. Then came the most chilling discovery of all. Inside the folds of Ethan's tarp, missed by rangers during their first sweep, Leah found a page from the Bible, torn out and circled in red ink. Isaiah 34:14. "The desert creatures will meet with the wolves, and the wild goat will call to its kind. Indeed, the night monster will settle there and find for herself a resting place." No one knew what to make of it, but the symbolism was unmistakable. It wasn't just about wilderness. It was about choosing to disappear, and suddenly, a new theory began to take shape, not from evidence, but from absence. What if Ethan hadn't been lost? What if he had been searching for something, and what if he thought he found it, somewhere no one else could go? David Cole stopped shaving on day 10. Not out of grief, though it lived in every wrinkle beneath his eyes, but because he simply didn't have time. He was sleeping 4 hours a night, eating granola bars and canned soup, and spending every waking moment following his son's ghost across maps that made less sense with each passing day. He'd pinned a printout of Olympic National Park to the wall of his slide-in camper. Red pushpins marked each clue, blue lines showed water routes, yellow highlighter traced the official search grid. David's own search areas were in black Sharpie, thick, erratic strokes that went beyond the trails and into the margins, into the places no one else was looking, because David didn't believe Ethan had fallen in the river anymore. He believed Ethan had left it. He told Ranger Keller exactly that one morning while standing over a soggy topo map outside the ranger station. He took gear with him, David said. He took his knives, his crampons, the jacket. That means he had a plan. He didn't slip, Keller sighed. You know what hypothermia does to the brain? Makes people do things that don't make sense. They strip off their clothes. They wander in circles. They go up instead of down. No, David said. But Ethan wasn't just cold. He was looking for something. Keller hesitated. People don't climb to die, David said. They climb to understand. The problem was, no one would let David search where he needed to. Olympic National Park had jurisdictional boundaries. Outside volunteer teams couldn't operate without approval. The Coast Guard had choppers 15 minutes away, but their request was denied. Even dog teams were turned away unless park approved, so David took matters into his own hands. He tied ropes to tree trunks and lowered himself into glacial pools beneath waterfalls. He bushwhacked through Devil's Club, ignoring the blood dripping from his hands. He developed trench foot from wearing wet socks for 14 straight days. He stopped answering Leah's texts. Each morning, he left a note in his camper. If I don't return by sundown, check Deer Ridge first. Back in Santa Cruz, David had been a contractor with a 6-month wait list and 2 full-time crews under his command. He'd built homes from the ground up, fixed foundation cracks, poured concrete with surgical precision, but now all he built was hope, and it was crumbling. On April 24th, Ethan's story reached national news. A segment ran on local TV. Then CNN picked it up. Viewers from across the country saw David's worn face and heard him say, "I'll find him. Even if I have to crawl to the summit with my bare hands, I'll find him." The clip went viral. Volunteers started arriving from Oregon, Idaho, even Colorado, but the park wouldn't allow them in. David begged, pleaded, screamed, then stopped asking altogether. He bought a used folding bike from a pawn shop, strapped it to his camper roof, and started scouting the San Juan Islands. His theory now: Ethan may have hitched a boat ride, started working under a fake name, or joined some back-to-the-land commune. He visited organic farms, asked about new volunteers. He walked through tent cities, shelters, and homeless encampments, showing Ethan's photo. At night, he sat by the river with a lantern lit until dawn, hoping his son would walk out of the trees. Meanwhile, Leah went back through Ethan's things, this time focusing on his Bible. She noticed something strange. Inside the back cover was a name, one none of them recognized: Samuel Gideon Cole. Handwritten, underlined. Ethan's middle name was James. The handwriting matched Ethan's. Why did he give himself a new name? On the last page, scribbled in red ink, were 3 words: "The silence answers." More theories began to surface, each darker than the last. Cult recruiter? A human trafficking operation? A religious vision quest gone wrong? Ethan had modeled once for a small clothing brand in Santa Cruz. He had the kind of face you remembered. That made him a target, David thought. What if someone lured him away? But the park refused to treat the case as anything more than a likely drowning. People don't just vanish, Keller told the press. But Ethan had, and that broke every rule. David stopped wearing a watch. He no longer knew what day it was. He just searched. One morning, while crossing a narrow bluff near Grand Ridge, he fell, rolled 15 feet down a slope, banged his ribs so hard he could barely breathe. He lay there for 20 minutes, gasping, staring at the sky, muttering, "Please, let me die where he is. Just let me be with him." But he got up and kept climbing. That night, as he lay beside his truck, bruised and shaking, he remembered a moment from Ethan's childhood. Age 10. A school play. Ethan had frozen on stage, unable to speak. Everyone laughed. David remembered, walking up the steps and whispering in his son's ear, "You're not lost. You're just waiting for the right words." Now, 12 years later, it was David who was on stage, speechless, paralyzed, waiting, and then a voice, a local hiker named Terry Bell, called in a report. He had been walking the ridge above Hull Lake, near the same location the botanist mentioned weeks earlier. He didn't see a person, but he found a scarf, tied to a tree, half frozen, burnt at the edge. The color? Deep red, like the feathers on Ethan's arrows. David hiked there alone, no permission, no backup, no regard for safety. He stood in the snow where the scarf hung limp against the wind. He looked around and whispered, "Are you here, son?" The wind replied with nothing. It was a Friday afternoon when the call came in. David was parked off a Forest Service road, eating a cup of cold beans with the door of his camper cracked open, letting in the scent of pine and the faint hum of insects. The phone barely had signal. Just one blinking bar. The voice on the other end was calm, clinical. "This is Officer Jenna Rowe with Olympic National Park." David sat up straighter, heart pounding. A group of biologists on survey discovered human remains near Hull Lake. "Ridge," she continued, "we believe they may belong to your son." Time folded in on itself. David didn't speak. Couldn't. All he heard was the wind rushing through the trees and the sound of a fork falling to the floor. The hike to the recovery site took nearly 5 hours, straight uphill, through uneven snowfields, icy ledges, and wind so sharp it sliced through David's rain gear. He wasn't supposed to be there. Rowe had told him explicitly, "Let the professionals do their job." But David was done waiting. "When does a father stop being a father?" he had asked. No one had an answer. So he climbed. Halfway to the ridge, near Deer Lake, he stumbled upon a group of rangers kneeling over a young woman. She was pale, not breathing. Another search team had been called to assist after she collapsed from sudden cardiac arrest. One of the men performing CPR looked up and recognized him. "David, go back. This isn't the time." But David knelt beside them and took a turn, doing compressions. For 15 minutes he pushed against her chest, counting aloud through gritted teeth. "I've done this before," he muttered. "I've done this for my son every damn day." The woman didn't make it, and as the medical crew covered her with a silver tarp, one of the rangers whispered, "She's the same age Ethan would be now." When David reached the ridge, the sky was burning with the last light of day. Smoke from wildfires in British Columbia had drifted south, turning the full moon red. It hovered just above the tree line, a glowing wound in the sky. Sight was surreal. No trail led here, no campsites. No shelters, just a wide, wind-blasted plateau of scree and stone, exposed, cold, merciless. Near the center of the ridge, tucked between two boulders, were the remains, partially buried. Clothing still intact, a Bible beside the body, not the one he had left near the river. A different one, older, leather-bound, his grandfather's. Dental records confirmed what David already knew. It was Ethan, but the autopsy revealed very little. No broken bones, no signs of trauma, no defensive wounds, no indication of drugs or foul play. Cause of death, inconclusive. The coroner suggested hypothermia. He had food, he had shelter gear, he had fire-starting tools, but something had failed. Or maybe he had given up. The question wasn't how Ethan died. It was why he died here, 15 miles from where he left his bike. 3,000 feet higher in elevation. Past avalanche zones, ice fields, and wild terrain, even seasoned hikers feared, why climb up when safety was down? Ranger Rowe later said, most lost adults head toward civilization. Ethan climbed away from it. David sat on that ridge until nightfall. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just stared at the spot where his son had chosen to stop walking. He remembered something Ethan had once written. To disappear is not to die. It's to listen so closely to silence that you finally hear yourself. They buried Ethan near the Soul River 3 weeks later. Small ceremony, just family and a few close friends, no reporters, no rangers, no answers. After the burial, Leah gave David a small package. It was the notebook Ethan had taken with him, but never shown anyone. Inside, most pages were blank, except the last one, written in faded red ink, barely legible. I was never lost, only becoming. And then it clicked, the 4 arrows, the scarf tied to the tree, the false name in the Bible, the shift in direction, the ridge, the river, the silence. Ethan had not run from something, he had walked toward something else. The house in Santa Cruz was long gone, but David sometimes drove past it. The new owners had painted the shutters blue, pulled out the plum tree, and added a security gate. Nothing of the Cole family remained. Still, David would park on the street at dusk, engine off, just listening, not for sounds, but for memories. He remembered Ethan on that front porch, age 6, balancing on his first bike, feet wobbling, eyes wide with fear. David had let go of the back wheel too soon. Ethan had crashed into the mailbox, scraped his knee, and cried. But the next day, he got back on. He always got back on. After the funeral, David didn't return to work. He sold his tools, shut down his contractor's license, and left his camper parked permanently in a friend's driveway. He no longer searched for his son, but he carried him. In every conversation, in every quiet moment, in every long walk with no destination. Leah started painting again. She hadn't touched a brush in over a year. But one afternoon, without thinking, she spread a canvas on the floor and began sketching mountains, ridge lines, rivers, silhouettes of trees. Then, in the center of it all, a lone figure walking uphill with a red scarf trailing behind him in the wind. She titled the piece, Becoming. Susan? Their mother had her own way of grieving. She began volunteering with missing persons support groups. She baked, she listened, she hugged strangers. And once, when a woman asked how she survived the unthinkable, Susan replied, "You don't survive it, you let it live with you, like a guest that never unpacks its suitcase." 3 months after the burial, David returned to the ridge one last time. He went alone, carrying nothing but a photo of Ethan and a single wooden arrow. He planted it in the ground at the exact spot where his son had been found, not as a memorial, but as a continuation of the line Ethan had started, a 5th arrow, pointing not east, not west, but up. As he stood there, clouds drifted across the valley, casting long shadows over the trees below. There was no wind, no sound, just stillness. And in that silence, David felt something he hadn't felt since the night the rangers called him. Not peace exactly, but permission. Later, he would describe that moment like this. For the first time, I stopped searching for where my son had gone, and started honoring what he was becoming when he left. He returned home and built a bench from old redwood Ethan had once helped him mill. He placed it on a cliffside trail overlooking the sea. Carved into the backrest were Ethan's final words, "I was never lost, only becoming." Visitors walk past it all the time now, stopping to read the words, not knowing who Ethan was or what happened to him. Some sit in silence, some cry. Some leave small things, stones, feathers, folded paper notes with nothing written on them. David visits that bench once a week, sometimes with Leah, Sometimes alone, he doesn't speak to his son, but he listens. One day, as he sat there with his eyes closed, he heard footsteps approach. A young man in his 20s asked, "Did you write that quote?" David opened his eyes, smiled, and shook his head. "No," he said. "My son did." The boy nodded. "It feels like something I've been trying to say." David looked out at the ocean, and for the first time in months, he didn't feel like crying. He felt proud. Because in the end, Ethan's life wasn't defined by the silence he left behind. It was defined by the questions he dared to ask, by the climb, by the arrows, by the faith that somewhere, beyond logic, there was something waiting for him that only he could understand. Sometimes the loudest questions are the ones never asked aloud. For months, people wondered what Ethan Cole had been searching for. They dissected maps, reviewed phone logs, debated whether he meant to vanish or simply lost his way. Experts wrote about survival psychology, search and rescue strategies, cognitive dissonance in hypothermia victims, but none of that captured the truth, because Ethan hadn't just left behind a mystery. He left behind a message, not in words, but in actions, not in what he said, but in what he did when the noise of the world became too much to bear. The arrows, the torn-out scripture, the shift from east to west, then up. The silence. It wasn't a mistake, it was a path, and though it ended with loss, it wasn't meaningless. Ethan wasn't trying to escape, he was trying to find something untouched, a place where expectations didn't weigh down his chest, where no one asked what came next, where he could just be, still unseen, unfinished, and maybe he found that place on that ridge above Hull Lake. Maybe it wasn't meant to be a grave. Maybe it was his cathedral. We live in a world that praises clarity, noise, and resolution, but some of the most beautiful truths live in what remains uncertain. Ethan's story doesn't offer a clean ending, but it offers something far more powerful. Permission. Permission to not have it all figured out. Permission to be overwhelmed, to change direction, to seek silence, to climb even when everyone else tells you to come back down. For his family, Ethan's disappearance was a wound time couldn't close. But over time, that wound became something else. A doorway, a lens, a line in the earth that asked, what do we really know about the people we love? And more importantly, how far would we go to find them? Not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, completely. David never found all the answers, but he found meaning in the questions. And maybe that's what Ethan wanted all along. Not to be found, but to be understood. Today, strangers still leave offerings on the bench by the sea. Some write letters to people they've lost. Others just sit, no words, just the wind. And the waves, and the silence that Ethan loved so deeply. This wasn't a case about disappearance. It was a story about becoming. And sometimes the people who vanish aren't running from the world. They're walking into something the rest of us can't yet see. I was never lost, only becoming.